Hello interwebs, this is my 1997 Camry 2.2 4-cylinder LE model. I have been chasing for some time a P0441 and 0446 pair of codes, which is a nice hard to find evaporative leak. Could be any number of things, and I've been ticking off the possibilities on down the list from least expensive to most expensive. So far, I've already replaced the gas cap with an OEM Toyota gas cap. That did not fix it. The next thing I did was change this valve here at the charcoal sensor. That is the vapor pressure sensor vacuum switch valve, or vapor pressure sensor VSV. That's part number 90910-12271. That ultimately, that did not work. Then I changed this one here. This is the VSV, or vacuum switch valve, for the EGR, which was faulty in my diagnosis. I changed that. I also double checked each time the hose connections and zip tied a couple of locations where the hose connections were somewhat loose, but lo and behold, the problem has persisted. So today, I'm going to go to the next step, which is installing a brand new charcoal canister right down there. And you can see the top of it here as well. On many of these models, the charcoal canister is up above the rear axle, but on a few models, like this one, this is a late 97 model, the charcoal canister is here underneath the master cylinder for the brake system. So we'll have to do a little bit of working around. We'll have to probably take out the airbox here, the main intake hose, probably also some bolts down here. There is, just as a point of reference, if you could see my pointer, there's the fuel filter. Again, the charcoal canister is right in that location. And we're going to begin. First thing we're going to do to begin to get the airbox and the intake out of the way is to remove this screw here. I use a 10mm head and just a handheld socket to twist it off. I find that being easier than using the Phillips head. That's step one. Okay, so the next step, which I've done, once you loosen this, you just gently but firmly move the intake hose off of the airbox and just out of the way as much as you can to give yourself more room to work. Okay, the next couple of simple steps we're going to do is unclamp the airbox here. We're going to remove this connector. Just kind of squeezes in there through a grommet, and set that to the side. And then also with the same 10mm, we're going to undo this guy here to again help us free the airbox as a whole. Okay, the next two steps as we continue disconnecting is I have a hose clamp here that's fastened on with just a flathead. Yours might be zip tied, or it could be clamped on with a different kind of clamp, but we're going to undo that. And then also back over here on the other end of the air intake hose, we're also going to use a 10mm and undo that, which in turn will loosen this, and we can take that off. That will free up much of this hose, and then we can really begin to get at what's beneath it. So again, this clamp here and that clamp there, and we'll come to the next step. Okay, I've removed the hose clamp and the hose itself and just kind of set it down below there. And then also up here, I have removed this clamp, or loosened the clamp, I should say. I'm going to take the hose out of its notch here on the top. This one should be able to stay in place. I think I can get enough play with it staying there, but we'll see. So now, just as I did in the first half, we're going to gently but firmly take this off and set that aside. And then over here, you'll see, let's see if I can get my light. There is a spring clamp of sorts that attaches to here, around there, and also another clamp that rests on this line as well. We're going to remove that, and that will help us to free the airbox. All right, we've gotten both of those clamps or clasps off. Now what I'm going to do, I have decided I'm going to remove this hose that comes off the VSV here, just to give myself a little bit more room to work. So you need to pinch that clamp off, and then occasionally these get kind of stuck on. And so I just take a pair of pliers and gently start to kind of break the seal a little bit. And that usually is enough then that you can pull it off by hand. Just a little twisting. Again, you want to be firm but gentle. And that will come right off the VSV, and we can just set that aside. Now that we've done these steps, the box itself, at least the top half, should be free, and most of this component should be able to come off. So we're going to try and do this together here. This should come off, and you can set it aside. There's your air filter. I just replaced mine not too long ago. Let's place that to the side, and then you'll be able to see this is largely loose. I think what I'm going to do before I continue is disconnect this hose clamp here and pull that off. That should free this unit entirely. So that will be the next step. All right, probably didn't need to loosen the hose clamp there. This actually just pulled out on its own when I gave it some gentle encouragement. There's two more points of connection we're going to loosen up. We're going to loosen up this hose clamp here on the VSV and this electrical connector here. Again, this works pretty simply. You just pinch and pull gently and set it aside. And then on this one, same as the one that was just next to it, take the clamp, slide it off, and with some gentle encouragement it should come. Mine came off very easily, but mind you, I just did this valve not too long ago. If you have trouble taking that hose off, again, just use a pair of pliers, would be my recommendation. Gently back and forth, and then work it off the rest of the way with your hands. With those clear, this whole unit now should be able to come out with a little bit of finagling. There we go. And we'll set that aside. And now you can actually begin to see the charcoal canister itself, the Evap canister, down here. So our next step is going to be to disconnect these hoses and begin to remove that. All right, here is my new Evap canister I'm planning on installing. And just to be clear, for this particular year, make, model, that's the Toyota OEM part number 77740 06042. I bought this from a Toyota dealer. Parts.toyota.com is where I often go for OEM parts. And there you can get parts dealers, Toyota dealers in your area that will sell OEM parts. Be sure, guys, to shop around on that. Just because a Toyota dealer is closest to you doesn't mean it's the cheapest. I live in California, and ones in LA, for example, you think it'd be cheaper, were actually significantly more expensive. I got this one from what's known as the Central Valley of California, from Madera Toyota. Give a shout out to them. They had a significantly reduced price. This is a brand new OEM part. So this is what's going to go in, and you'll see that it already comes with several hoses that connect back onto itself. I'm a shade tree mechanic. I don't know what they're all called. But in terms of removing the old one, then you'll see we don't have to disconnect everything. Okay? So let's look at the one that's in the car now. And we'll want to disconnect this electrical connector here. We'll want to disconnect this hose right here, not the outside one. That one's going to stay. But this one, one in from the inside, disconnect that. And then we're also going to disconnect this hose here that has a clamp on it in my case, and then this hose here. So 1, 2, 3, and an electrical connector. Okay, the next step is going to be to remove the actual charcoal canister itself. To do that, we need to unbolt it. And there are 3 fastening points. You'll see it's so helpful to look at the new part to see. If it's not always easy to see in the engine, you can at least see it more easily on the part itself. So here we've got 1 bolt, 2 bolts, 3 bolts that fasten it to the car. Again, if we're looking at it from the top, the bracket sits against the car like this. Your fuel filter sits down here. So I'll show you the engine compartment in a minute, but you're going to have 1 bolt kind of above the fuel filter, 1 below the fuel filter, and then a 3rd one in kind of a tricky-dicky spot over here. But not impossible. And at least on my make model, they are 10mm heads. It's very common that Toyota helpfully uses the same size in a lot of these smaller parts. So here you can see that here is the first one. Put my light down. Here's the first one. That's the first one, the top part of the bracket. And then just below, I don't know if the light's good enough, but you can see this is the bolt that actually holds on the fuel filter bracket. There's one about 2 inches below it that is actually the bracket for the evap canister. My middle finger, right here, is touching it. So it's right in that spot, just below the bracket. And then the third one, like I said, is a little trickier to get to. It's going to be back and around this side over here. You're going to have to go down and around the other side of the charcoal canister. And again, that bolts against the side. They are all 10mm, and that'll be the next step. The first one was quite easy to get at. I used my socket. It's just a straight socket with a retractable arm or handle on it. With a 10mm, I got that one out quite easily. The one up underneath the fuel filter has a bit more snugness to it, so I'm going to use my socket wrench with an extender and a couple of adapters to make sure that that 10mm there can fit on the end. That'll give me some more torque and leverage to get out that number 2 bolt. The first 2 bolts are out. The third one is very hard to get on camera here. I'm kind of leaning over the engine. You can see the tip of my screwdriver pointing right at that third 10mm bolt. Just to give you a point of reference, there is the steering shaft column right there, or the knuckle that comes out. So it's back underneath here. I think this is going to be open enough that I can get my socket back on there and spin it off just like I did the number 2 bolts. That's what we're going to try. All right, that was fairly easy to get off. I was able to work it out about 70% of the way, and then with my arm kind of crooked around there, get out the rest of the way. But I did notice that there's one more hose yet that has to be disconnected off the evap canister. And it's right here. My screwdriver's pointing to it. Just underneath the VSV right here. Mine just has a pinch clamp. I'm going to pinch it open, work it off, and then, again, gently but firmly back this hose off, and then our box should come out. All right, getting that hose off was the hardest part so far, but it wasn't that hard. Rather than pulling it, I actually got a pair of needle nose pliers and pinched both sides of it and kind of leveraged it off away from the box, or away from the canister, I should say. And that did the trick, and it finally popped off. What I'm going to go ahead and do, though, now is also remove the fuel filter bracket. I've been wiggling this for a little bit, and I don't really see it coming out very easily with that fuel filter in the way. So I'm not going to disconnect the fuel filter. God, no. I've installed that. I don't want to do that again. But this bracket just has 2 10mm bolts, one there and one underneath the wiring harness down there. And then the hose has some play in it here. And so obviously you don't want to kink or bend or snap the metal portion of the fuel line coming in. But once that bracket comes off, we can move it enough out of the way, I think, that will make getting out the evap canister quite simple. So again, 2 10mm bolts fastened onto the wheel well area here, just like the evap canister bracket itself. That's our next step, taking off the fuel filter bracket. Okay, we backed out the 2 10mm from our fuel filter bracket. And you can see now, see if I can get out of my light, see now that the bracket itself has just enough play. Of course, it's still attached by a line down here, a fuel line down here, and also up top, so you're not going to have a ton of more room. But I think this will give us enough play to get it out, up and around, underneath the master cylinder and still above this fuel line. And on mine, the bolts that came out for the fuel filter bracket, again, I installed these myself a couple years ago, are significantly longer than the ones that came out for the bracket for the evap canister. So you want to make sure you keep those separate. Those are the 3 for the evap canister. Those are the 2 for the fuel filter bracket. So again, we're going to get back in here and being very careful to not bend or kink the fuel lines. We're going to work out the evap canister completely. All right, just as I had estimated, being able to take out the bolts for the fuel filter bracket was very, very helpful. Gave me just enough play, as you can see here, to kind of wiggle it up and out. That is the evap canister up and out. But again, going back in, you want to make sure, you got to be very careful, the fuel lines here and there, you don't want to crimp or bend them or snap them. That would be a very, very bad day at the office. Up here, this is our new Evap canister again, with our 3 fastening points, 1, 2, and 3, each with a 10mm bolt. So the first step on the install is going to be to work it back down in there. And then my plan is to insert the hardest one to get to first by hand, get that started, get these 2 started and kind of position it, and then we'll start reconnecting everything else. All right, that was simple to get it back down in there. Just wiggled it, again being careful of the fuel lines. But I've changed my mind on the first one I'm going to put in. I'm going to put in the top one here that's most accessible. That will kind of give me an anchor point to work from, and then from there I'll either do the second one or the one in the back. So we're going to start here with first bolt back in. This goes in right by the top mount of the strut. All right, we've got the first one back in here. The second one was a little difficult to match up with the hole, but if you can see down there, I did start it. What I'm going to do next is reattach the fuel filter bracket with both of those longer bolts, just so that's back in place and I'm not continuing to bang it around. Okay, we've got the 2 10mm bolts back in for the fuel filter bracket. Again, I just wanted that fastened back up there again so I wasn't continuing to shake, rattle, and roll on the fuel lines. So again, right now we've got this one 10mm bolt up here fastened for the Evap canister bracket and the one below by hand. Now, the next step is to get to that third one back there again and also start that by hand and then finish it up with the socket and ratchet. Okay, we've got the 3 10mm bolts of the Evap canister bracket back in. I'm a stickler for torque, but on those you don't need torque, you just need them good and tight. But don't go Arnold Schwarzenegger on them or you're going to snap the bolt and that would also be a bad day at the office. So just good and snug. And now we're going to start reconnecting. Let's see if I can put my light down here. First thing we're going to do is reconnect the electrical connector. This will just slide and snap on, or it should. There we go. Let's see, get it right. There we go. Hear it nice and click. Then you've got a hose right here that connects to your map sensor. That one can just slide right on, and you want to make sure that they're fully seated all the way up to the collar where they come out of the plastic. Put my light down here. I'll get that on as far as we can. All right, and then down here, this is the one that was most difficult to get off in my experience, but we're going to slide that right back on, nice and snug. And then mine just has a pinch clamp. Make sure that you bring that back up, pinch it on, give it a tug, make sure it's nice and snug. We're good to go. So we're in business so far. The next thing is going to be to put our air box set up back in place, starting with that guy. Okay, we've got our air intake hose ready to go back on. I'll try and do this with one hand here. First, you got to go kind of down and in and get this situated onto the intake itself. A little tricky with the air box there, but it just kind of goes up and over. Don't force it if you hit some resistance. You've got a cable or a wire in the way. So now that I've got this on here, I'm not going to keep the camera on while I do this, but I'm going to reconnect this, make sure it's good and snug, then tighten up your clamp, and then we'll start on the next step to reconnect these hoses as well. But the next step for now, fasten that back to your intake and tighten up the clamp. Okay, the hose is attached back to the intake. I tightened that up good and tight. Now we're going to start reconnecting down here. You've got one short hose that comes up to your canister. That just slides right on. And you clamp it. And then the longer hose that comes up over the top of your intake, remember it notches into this. It just rests there to keep it from flailing around. That one goes on the outside here. So again, comes down from the intake over the top of the large hose, snakes down, and this one's going to go on the outside of this vacuum switching valve, like so. It's hard to see this while I'm doing the camera as well, but not difficult. Just slides right back on. Make sure it seats all the way. Give it a good firm push, and then get your butterfly or your pinch clamp back on there, like so. And then the third piece on this component is reconnecting your electrical connection with a snap, like that. Your VSV is now back in business. Again, just a word on this. There was a repair in this area I was doing some years ago, and the original OEM, 20-some-year-old intake hose by that point was brittle, and unbeknownst to me, when I was manhandling it, I cracked the elbow back here. It was only after a tank full of poor gas mileage I realized that I had really ripped it wide open. So this is a brand new one, as of a couple of years ago anyway. So just be aware, if yours is older, you got to kind of treat this with kid gloves and really make sure that after you put it back on, you just kind of do a physical and visual inspection to make sure it's still intact. All right, the next step is going to be to, I didn't put this on video, but at one point I did take out my air filter because I didn't want my elbow crushing all of its folds. So that just rests back in your box like this. And then the next thing we're going to do is take our lid and fasten it back on here. Remember, on the back side you have these two kind of clamps that hug around your wires there. So you're going to start from the back. There's a hinge down there, two hinges you can see right here, a hinge point and a hinge point. So you're going to seat the hinge in there, then clamp it back around, then it's going to close, and then you'll attach these two clamp brackets in the front. Okay, so I've got the hinges on. You can see there's one hinge there and then one hinge over there. And I've got the box back on, the air filter in, and the clamps, these two clamps put back on. Next thing is going to be to try to match up these two holes here. So I can put my light down again. This and this need to match up. This needs to go over the top of this, as so. And you're going to put the one bolt back in. But to do this, you've got to match the intake hose up with this here, and then also reinstall this hose here that just should pop in and out. So there's a reconnection point there, a reconnection point here with a tightened hose clamp, and then the 10mm bolt to fasten the whole get up back together right there. So we're going to do that. We're going to reattach this number 1, that number 2, and when we're all said and done, this number 3. All right, we've reconnected our air intake hose, our hose over here as well. Just a point of clarity that you want your drive wire, see how it comes down from your throttle here and comes out underneath the hose, and that one's going to clamp into the black clamp down here. The one above it is going to clamp into this silver aluminum clamp here. So those are important placements. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult for you to get this back in. When you get it back in, again, just pay attention to the notch here. You want to line that up with the receiving notch on this end, and then again, tighten this guy up. So our concluding step is going to be to tighten this screw, and then also reinstall our bolt for that guy, and reconnect a couple things over here. Okay, we're down to the bitter end here. We've only got 3 short steps left, which are all kind of wrapped in one. There's going to be a bolt that'll get reinserted here. Your air intake sensor is going to be popped back into its grommet right here. Goes right there. And then the last hose is right underneath it, right there. That gets reattached onto the male portion here and then reclamped, tightened down with the hose clamp. So last 3 steps. We're going to do the air intake, the hose with the clamp, and the bolt. Okay, folks, God is good. We should be ready to rock and roll. I'm going to erase my check engine code with an OBD2 code reader, which you can get online for fairly inexpensive, or I believe you can just disconnect your battery terminal and that will also erase it, but I'm not positive about that. But this is my first, perhaps my last car repair video. I'm just thankful for all the people like yourself who have shared videos here and there and taught me much about working on my own car. I wanted to give back in thanksgiving to all the folks out there and to the Lord himself who gives me wisdom to do these things. Thanks for watching. Hope it's been helpful for you. Happy driving. Stay safe. God's peace to you every day.